So, Monty Python comedian John Cleese has said that wokeness has had a disastrous impact on comedy. This seems to be well true. The our ability to tell certain jokes seems to be problematic because certain jokes apparently are problems. So, entertainment icon John Cleese slammed wokeness for having a disastrous impact on comedy. Cleese was a keynote speaker at Freedom Fest conference in Las Vegas when he spoke up about how to cultivate creativity, a skill he believes is essential, but sounded an alarm of political correctness that has become a major obstacle. When asked if comedians have the freedom to be funny in the year 2022, Cleese firmly responded with no. There's always been limitations on what they're allowed to say. Why, if you go to Molleray and Louis XIV, Molleray had to be a bit careful, and there will always be limitations. England, until some ridiculous late date like 1965, all plays had to be submitted to what used to be called the palace, to the Lord Chamberlain, and he would read it. And there were hilarious letters that used to go back saying, you may only say F once, this sort, and you cannot say bugger, but you can say these negotiating letters. So, yeah, the idea that the people in power are trying to control comedy is not a new concept. But then how that manifests today in terms of who's trying to control comedy is the wokeness. Continuing on, Cleese says, quote, but I think it's particularly roaring at the moment because you can only create in an atmosphere of freedom where you're not checking everything you say critically before you move on. What you have to be able to do is build without knowing where you're going because you've never been there before. That's what creativity is. You have to be allowed to build. And a lot of comedians are now sitting there, and when they think of something, they have to think of something like, can I get away with it? I don't think so. So-and-so got in trouble, and they say that, and they said, you see what I mean? And that's the death of creativity. So I'd say at the moment, this is a difficult time, particularly for young comedians. But you see, my audience is much older, and they're simply not interested in most of the woke attitudes. They just think you should be able to try to be kind to people and need not complicate, you know? I do know. I have to say that I understand this as a creator on YouTube. And Stephanie and I, for example, have had discussions behind the scenes about whether or not I can cover certain topics or certain discussions. And the discussions always come down to these kinds of fears. Like, can I, as a creator, go forward and say certain things and have certain opinions, or at least express those opinions? And from time to time, as a result of those discussions, I've concluded the answer is no. And I'm not, by the way, I want to make absolutely clear here, I'm not blaming Stephanie. Stephanie is doing exactly what she's supposed to be doing, which is helping me work through these issues. The fact that Stephanie is correctly, in my view, highlighting these concerns and noting these concerns is not her being a bad person. It's her noting exactly what the concerns are. And then trying to decide, is it worth it? Can I cover certain things? Can I talk about certain things? Or do I have to fear these issues? And so it can get to you as a creator. And it can, and for the comedians, I can't even begin to wonder how much they have to worry about all this. It's like, can I make these jokes? Can I cover the subject matter without this fear? And so this potential blowback is a death to creativity. So it is a real problem. It can be a real problem. The Monty Python star explained that wokeness allows the critical mind to take over the creative, saying they're in opposition to each other. They can be. You can do the creation and criticize it, but you can't do them both at the same time. So if you're worried about offending people and constantly thinking that, you're not going to be very creative. I definitely understand that to some degree, to be sure. Cleese lamented that everything is more politicized now, including late night comedy in America. He pointed to late night show Stephen Colbert, who he adores, but acknowledged his audience is more obviously politically aligned. Yeah, I think Stephen Colbert is a good comedian, but I think that his current show has become a political fest, and the comedy is hurt for it. It wasn't like this when I first got to America, Cleese said. When I first got to America in the 60s, two things happened. First of all, I very much admire the cross-aisle friendship and thought we don't have that in England. We had real battles between the Tories and Labor, but in America there seems, and this was destroyed by Newt Gingrich, quite deliberately for the purpose of power. I think that's tragic. And Newt Gingrich's role in this is debatable, to be sure. He is a powerful figure, and he was an important figure. The degree to which he's responsible or not is debatable, but there has definitely been something that's changed in the United States for sure. When asked if late night comedians can ever reunite both sides of the aisle like they used to, he replied, no, adding comedians can sometimes summarize in a moment what's happening very well, but they don't change the things. I mean, it does seem that way, where certain kinds of comedy are not acceptable, and we're running into problems where we're having the issues with this cross-platform comedy. Yeah. The 82-year-old British funny man stood firmly against the notion that any comedian should be canceled over a joke and should allow audiences to decide what's funny. If you go to a Republican convention and tell an anti-democratic joke, you'll get a very good response. If you tell anti-Republican jokes, you won't. I'm not sure how true that is, but that's what he thinks. So you got to fit your material to some extent to your audience, and that's part of it. If you go see a granny and have tea with her, you don't start telling her certain kinds of jokes. Not because it's illegal, it's just bad manners. So I think you would think what the audience is, and then you might shock them a little bit because that's fun. And also I point out on stage, if you get into areas that are a little taboo, you actually get the biggest laugh, which is why sexual humor is often greeted with huge laughs, not even when it's not particularly funny. It's to do with anxiety and release of anxiety. When people relax or laugh with spare energy, comes from something they've laughed at where they had anxiety before. Cleese offered a grim forecast on the future of comedy, saying he feels a great sadness about how there are very, very, really good few good comedy scripts. Certainly in England, when I went to theater between the 60s and 2000s, there are probably 6 or 7 writers absolutely writing wonderful comedies, beautifully constructed, good characters. I think there's in America true because Broadway was all important and people were working on Broadway are very literate. They wrote a great deal and they knew how to plot. What I feel now is very few people understand how to plot the comedy. So comedies in America are really aimed at young men because they're the ones who go to the cinema on Friday night, which means the box office looks good. And it's all done ultimately to money because now we have studios that are far more interested in money than making great movies. And in the old days, they wanted to make great movies too. There might be some truth to that, to be sure, especially when it comes to just churning out sequel after sequel instead of taking risk with new movies. So there's definitely some truth to that, to be sure. So that brings us to the end of the story from John Cleese saying that wokeness has had a disastrous impact on comedy and in the creative process for other creators as well, where you have to contemplate what you say and how you say it and to the degree to which you'll be canceled, particularly if you're a creator like myself on YouTube and you have to worry about what YouTube will allow you to say or not and the rules and guidances there too. Thank you so much for being part of the Uncivil Law family. If you enjoyed this legal education content, please hit the subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow. We appreciate your continuing support. And until later, my friends, cheers and goodbye.